I'm Simon Hodson, Executive Director of CODATA. CODATA is the coordinator of the WorldFAIR Project. And really our objective in WorldFAIR is to work with a set of 11 domain and cross-domain case studies, each of those is a work package, on their implementation and understanding of the implications of the FAIR principles. Those case studies are very important because they were chosen collectively by CODATA and by RDA from existing activities or contacts, people we were already working with, whether it was a CODATA task group or a group that had been involved in CODATA activities, or an RDA community of practice or working group or interest group. And in that way, we leveraged our collective communities to identify a remarkable, absolutely remarkable range of case studies. And I think that in particular makes the WorldFAIR project extremely rich and deepens our understanding of the requirements of FAIR and how they can be implemented in each of those case studies. They were chosen as well with a view to how we can establish connections across them. So there are 3 case studies, for example, that relate to chemistry. Chemistry itself, led by IUPAC, which is the authoritative organization for chemical standards globally. Geochemistry and a group around the world working on geochemistry terminologies, which are really important, and a group working on nanomaterials. So each of those 3 case studies have cross-cutting points of interest among them. Similarly, there's a cluster of 3 social science or health-related case studies: social surveys, population health, and urban health as well. And in the selection of the case studies, what we really tried to do was to find a lead organization that was in some way authoritative, that really helps a given research area make definitive decisions about how they implement FAIR and what standards and protocols and terminologies they will use. And for almost all the case studies we have that, and if we don't, we have world-leading projects which can play that role as well. Because in not all research areas do we have those authoritative organizations. That's something that we need to think about. CODATA's leading what we call Work Package 2, which is really a synthesis and coordination activity. And we have 3 primary objectives and deliverables in that. A set of FAIR implementation profiles and to explore the methodology behind FAIR implementation profiles. That's really essentially a questionnaire, a detailed questionnaire which each of the case studies has completed to indicate what their thinking is at the moment and what their aspirations would be in the future for how they implement FAIR. And that gives us an important insight into those research areas, how they respond to the FAIR principles, and most importantly, how data works in that domain. What it is they're measuring or observing or recording, what terminologies and concepts they're using. And so armed with that information, we're now working on what we call the CDIF, the Cross-Domain Interoperability Framework. Now that's absolutely not a new standard. It's not one standard to rule them all. What it is a framework. It's exactly that. We've taken each of the FAIR principles and some related functions which are required for combining data, for data interoperability, and we're looking at what the common standards are across the case studies and elsewhere. What is beginning to emerge as a cross-domain standard for data discoverability, for example? What are good practices for describing terminologies and concepts? What are emerging standards for describing data structure, for describing the variable cascade, which is the relationship between a concept and the implementation of that concept in a database and the description of the data? What are emerging good practices around provenance and process? And a whole load of things like that. So it's actually very rich, it's very complex, but it's definitively not a new standard. It's a set of framework, it will be a framework and a set of recommendations which will help, we think, any domain or cross-domain research area understand what is good practice and how they can make sure that their data and the metadata that describes their data interfaces with this framework which will act as a lingua franca. So a not definitive or final, but a very substantial version of that will be the key project deliverable from Work Package 2. The third thing that we're looking at in Work Package 2, on the basis of the FAIR implementation profiles and our interaction with the case studies throughout the project, to make some more domain-sensitive recommendations about FAIR assessment. There's a lot going on in FAIR assessment, particularly in Europe, but also elsewhere. And we want to understand how we can target those recommendations around FAIR as much as possible to what we find empirically from the case studies. And we think that will do a service to our collective thinking about how we assess the fairness of data and metadata. So the RDA Plenary, as always, has been a great experience. It's a really, above all for them, networking. It's a really good opportunity to meet colleagues, data experts, data stewards from around the world. We chose the RDA Plenary as a venue for organizing a couple of WorldFAIR related workshops, one specifically on the Cross-Domain Interoperability Framework, one on some related work from the DDI Alliance on cross-domain integration and a standard or specification that assists with cross-domain integration. Using the RDA Plenary as a venue like that and engaging with the community here is obviously a wonderful opportunity. A number of our case studies are represented here, and it's also a valuable opportunity to understand what's going on in related areas. So for me this week in particular, in relation to semantics, to semantic artifacts and the work that's going on in the Cadbury's work in RDA. And it's also an opportunity to engage with colleagues from around the world and to try and get them interested in what we're doing in WorldFAIR. WorldFAIR is 9 months into the project. We still have another 15 months to go. From a Work Package 2 perspective, our focus now is on CDIF, on the Cross-Domain Interoperability Framework, while keeping our contact and engagement with each of the case studies to make sure that CDIF and our thinking about that works for them and vice versa, to make sure that we learn from their approaches and their activities. Thinking more long term, obviously we really want to extend WorldFAIR and the WorldFAIR approach beyond the life of the project. We think we have a really good methodology. We think it's quite innovative, and we think that the CDIF in particular will be a valuable addition to the tools that colleagues have to help make data interoperable within their domain and across domain. We want to keep refining that, and we want to extend the scope of WorldFAIR globally. Something I should have said is that WorldFAIR was funded by the European Commission, but with the explicit remit to include institutions and partners, beneficiaries from outside the European Union. So it was with a vision of a global project. And we want to extend that, those set of partners, that scope, to other institutions, other research areas, other countries that we're not hitherto working with. And I think what comes out of WorldFAIR can be the basis for additional global collaboration in the context of CODATA and Research Data Alliance activities.